ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the CentreCourt MBA Festival in San Francisco. We're in the glorious Bentley Reserve for the next few hours, but also very conscious that we are streaming to a global audience in the small hours of the morning in different parts of the world. And we always start the CentreCourt Festival with the committee. And the idea of applying to business school, what are those conversations that take place behind the curtain when all of those applications come in for round 1, round 2, round 3, and then the team gets together and really starts to discuss in detail. So we've put together 8 or 9 profiles based on some of you that will be with us here at the San Francisco event and sharing insights. So I've got a great team for the next 45 minutes. To my immediate right, Deborah McCandless, who is an Associate Director of Admissions at the IESE Business School in Barcelona in Spain. Next to her, Adrián Aguirre, who is the Associate Director of Admissions at UCLA Anderson. And Caroline Diarty-Edwards, one of the co-founders of Fortune Admissions, who was for 7 years the Admissions Director at INSEAD. So thanks, the three of us, and I guess we'll go for the first slide, and I think we start with Aretha, who is the consultant. Well, actually, we start with our team, now that we know who we are. I'd admit this one, but no, this one I'm not going to have in the program. So next slide is Aretha, who is a consultant. And of course, this challenge of standing out in the applicant pool, the consultants, the bankers, the software engineers, what do they have to do to really grab the attention of the schools? No shortage of consultants, Caroline, that used to apply to INSEAD. So when you look at Aretha's profile, some of the schools that she's targeting, that maybe will include INSEAD, 4 years out at BCG. What strikes you about, what's strong in the profile, and then any concerns you might have?
Yeah. Well, so BCG is a great credential to have, so the schools are well aware that firms like BCG have a very rigorous recruitment process, and the quality of work experience will be very strong. So they'll know that she's had to really prove herself with very challenging clients, had a very intense 4 years working at BCG, and will have learned a lot during that time. So really valuable work experience. The challenges, of course, as you mentioned, the volume of management consultants applying to business school, and so, how do you make yourself stand out amongst the pool of very strong consultants? So you need to find some element of your work experience or another part of your profile that distinguishes you. And going into private equity, so that's a very common career goal. Kind of easy to say on your MBA application, but much more difficult to achieve in reality. So, they don't recruit in vast numbers. They're often looking for some very specific and very relevant work experience pre-MBA. So, maybe she's got that through working at BCG. Maybe she's worked with finance clients where she's going to have some very specific sector experience that she'd bring to a PE role. But that's not necessarily an easy sell to a future recruiter. And of course, admissions committees are always thinking about whether the career goals are realistic and achievable.
Right. Deborah, to look at, how she then stands out with what she's doing outside of work, and we know these consulting firms keep people very busy. Minds matter. In Aretha's case, Big Brother, Big Sister, which is a fairly common, it's a great organization. So how do you then judge what that might be worth in terms of the quality of this applicant?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of people involved in an organization like Big Brother, Big Sister. I'd say when it comes to volunteer work like that, you may want to be able to go into a little bit of what you did with them, how involved, how long your commitment was, because just signing up and meeting with someone once is not the same as being involved in running things within an organization, or with Big Brother, Big Sister, maintaining that relationship, mentoring someone through different parts of their lives, and keeping that going while having a big consulting career. And we do understand with a job like consulting, you're on the road a lot, it's hard to keep up commitments, but I think a lot of people feel this need to put down volunteer work even if it's not something that they have a lot of time for or necessarily a lot of passion about. And that's stuff that will come out when we're talking with you through the interview process. And we do pick up which parts are fluff, which parts are really passions for you. So, if you're putting on, a mentor, like, if you can include something about that, if it makes sense to include it in an essay or something like that, or bring it up during the interview, if it's something that you are really involved with that can really highlight skills that you'd bring into an MBA program that maybe aren't touched on as much with your professional career.
Right.
If you don't mind,
please jump in.
I wanted to add just a couple of thoughts on the post-MBA career goals. Private equity is something that we hear thrown around quite often in admissions committees. So being able to be a little bit more specific, identifying perhaps companies in this space and a place where we might see that is in an essay. The other thing too is oftentimes people will have sort of medium-term goals and really long-term aspirational goals where they're looking to have more of an impact. So it's also okay for some folks to specify what they want to do right after business school, but let us know what they're passionate about and they want to do in the super long term or in the real long term. And finally, I would say that when folks are interviewing, especially somebody with a profile like this, like Aretha's, it's potentially possible that this person may feel that they have such a strong profile that they don't really have to sell themselves on some of the softer parts of the process. What is my fit with the school? Do I see myself here? This is how I would contribute back to your institution. And those are things that are actually quite easy, but you would be amazed how often it gets overlooked.
Right. Can I just get one of you to come on recommenders? Because the idea of approaching someone that has been to business school, of course, they know the whole sort of path of putting together strong applications. Is there a downside? Clearly the recommender could say, I know the booth experience and why I think this candidate might thrive there. But Stanford might turn around or INSEAD and say, yeah, but they might fit at Booth, but they wouldn't fit at our school. So is there anything to be mindful of there?
Well, I don't think schools are too sensitive about that. So, they understand that you're not going to have, an HBS alum for your HBS recommendation and an INSEAD alum for your INSEAD application. So, so they're not that picky about it. And they appreciate that someone who's been to a top business school will understand what the experience is about and, what someone can get out of business school. So, normally they're able to write a strong recommendation. It's great if that recommender can show some insight into, what is special about HBS or what is special about INSEAD and why that is a good fit for this particular candidate. So, one other thing that I think, this candidate should be careful of is that, partners at firms like this are churning out recommendations all the time. So, they often have templates on their computer and they change a few words here and there and they pack it off to another school. So you've got to be careful that it's not another formulaic recommendation and that it really is something that comes from the heart and it's genuinely about you. So it's it's a mistake to just ask someone to do your recommendation and then assume that they're going to go away and do a great job. Even if it is a partner at a firm like BCG, you need to really sit down with them and talk them through the questions that are going to be asked, how they're going to tailor it to your specific case.
Right.
So making sure that they really dedicate some time to that process is very important.
Now with an event in San Francisco and here in the Bay Area, the next slide brings up Deepak. And Deepak is a male engineer. In fact, in this case, he's an Indian male engineer, a very well represented part of the applicant pool. He's ambitious in the schools. He's got Anderson on the list. Adrian, good to see.
Well, thank you.
And he's been at Intel for the last 3 years as a hardware engineer. Would like to move to the more sort of product management side and staying within tech. Adrian, well, let's start with you. What do you like about this applicant and what were the concerns?
Sure. Well, one of the first things, obviously, he's thinking about applying to our program. We like him already for that. As an engineer with 3 years of work experience, his profile may be one shared by a lot of other folks with very similar backgrounds. So one of the challenges for somebody like that is to distinguish themselves as moving a little bit away from being an individual sole contributor to somebody who's beginning to have larger scope of responsibilities, who's maybe more invested in things happening around different departments or different areas. So a challenge for Deepak is going to be to communicate how he's more than just an engineer, but it's an engineer that is exhibiting some leadership potential and therefore will stand out from the crowd. The goals in tech product management are solid. There's a lot of people that we see applying into those roles with some technical background and expertise, so that's very, very helpful. Looking back at his GPA and the GMAT scores, I would say the GMAT score, for example, listed for his profile at 700, well, it is not a bad number by any stretch of the imagination. He's competing in a very tough market where a lot of the folks coming from that part of the world are really master test takers. So that's going to be an area where he's really going to have to work to differentiate himself through some of the other attributes of his application. And obviously, the request of the boss to have him write his own letters of recommendation is a little bit problematic for us because it is very evident when we read a letter of recommendation when it's being written by the person who should be writing it. So we totally support people coaching the recommenders. You know, I often talk about having a grid where one is looking for people that know you best, but also that care for you sufficiently to want to do a good job. So you're looking for that intersection of knowledge and caring so they can really defend the case and talk about your contributions and how you're going to make an impact at the school.
And Deborah, just to pick up on that point, it's not about the job title of your recommender, it is that sort of substantive relationship and really being able to share insights.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a lot of people that, you know, sort of every year, anyone that reads applications will see those recommendations that are from like the CEO of the company where it's 2 lines long, something along the lines of, I think they worked here, they were probably on time. And it's really not helpful for us. So when you are shopping around looking for a recommender, as Adrian said, like you really want to find someone that knows you, that has worked closely with you, and you know, in an ideal world, it's your boss. We know that it's not an ideal world, and that's not always a conversation you want to be having a year away from leaving the job to let them know that you are leaving the job. So, you know, if it's a former boss, former coworker, clients, you know, that's also fine. But again, as you said, you know, you want someone that knows you well and knows you professionally and will say something good about you, being that third thing that sometimes also gets shockingly overlooked. And one other thing for this profile, because, you know, a lot of people do use engineering. A lot of engineering profiles do come through business schools as a way of sort of transitioning to a more management role from a more technical role. And I think for someone that has been doing engineering, that's been in a very technical role throughout, finding ways where you can really touch on some of your people skills, some of the soft skills, I think is very valuable. So whether that's, you know, projects you might have taken on that weren't necessarily required of your job, or something external, wherever it is that you find it, and also, you know, working on those skills so that when you interview, you come off as genuine and you're comfortable as well.
Right.
Definitely makes a big difference.
Right. Well, wine and people skills go very well together. I think our next profile is based about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. Can we move on to that? So Justin, the marketing maverick, who's been working up in a vineyard in Sonoma, but spent a couple of years in South Africa, INSEAD, HEC, EASA, i.e. the top European schools as a target. Caroline, just how important is it to be able to show those international credentials and something of real substance again?
Yes, yeah. So these international schools are looking for some substantial international experience, and you know, what exactly that means varies somewhat by school, but INSEAD is looking for some, you know, work abroad, study abroad, not just, you know, sitting on a beach or backpacking for a couple of weeks. And so extensive travel, you'd have to expand on that a bit. And you know, if you don't have, you know, substantial time spent abroad, you really need to communicate, you know, what you did get out of the experience, and also, you know, why you want to be part of a very international community. You know, the schools that he's targeting, you know, they're very international schools, and you know, if you're aspiring to work in an international organization and work at an international level, then going to study at one of those schools makes a lot of sense, and you need to convey that if you don't have a lot of international experience. in your background. So yes, that would definitely be something that a school like INSEAD is going to be scrutinizing in that profile.
Okay. Deborah, just to mix up who comments on the GMAT scores, 650 and the breakdown, would that be a concern?
Yes, so for someone like this that has had a undergrad and a career that's leaned a little bit more towards soft skills, when we're looking at a GMAT score, I mean, it's a little bit lower than our normal average to begin with, but also we look at the breakdown, and that's something that's important to us. So if you have a soft skills background and you don't have a lot of representation of that on your undergrad transcript, we kind of need to lean on the GMAT or the GRE to get an understanding of how comfortable and confident you are with the math part that will be in the MBA. And admittedly, most MBAs you're not going to require calculus, but we do need you to be comfortable and fluent in math. So if it's an area that's maybe not as represented in your work history and you're struggling with it in the GMAT, the GRE, you may also want to consider looking into outside classes, something that's going to, support, both your application and potentially preparation for yourself in terms of getting back into numbers and being comfortable, so it's a little bit less difficult of a transition to get back into that with business school.
Right, presumably based on the wine industry, Justin is very good at counting in multiples of 12. But just a final comment, Adrian, on going back to college for a recommender?
Yeah, I would actually discourage that because in my 8 years of experience in admissions, I have yet to see a single academic recommendation that goes beyond he showed up, got good grades, and
which is on the transcript anyway.
Right. So what we want to see is all the other interesting soft skills, contributions, your ability to handle difficult situations, overcoming challenges, even if there are shortcomings and difficulties. What we want to see is an honest appraisal of your potential and your skills. So it is sort of a wasted opportunity that it could be best utilized with another person that may add to the profile and help you sell yourself to us. As admissions officers, all of us are really working, trying to find the best in people to sell them to the rest of the committee. And when we have something like this potentially not helping, it just handicaps our efforts.
Right. Okay, we'll move on to the next one because we've got a few to get through. Michelle, who's working for one of the big four, in this case Deloitte, and hoping to move into a Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple role. Just the top 10. It's a bit vague, right, to sort of say, well, I want to go to a top 10 school. How would you read that, Deborah?
It kind of looks like you haven't done any research, really. Because,
so you come to CentreCourt, you
yes,
schools.
Yeah. Yes, and admittedly, MBA fairs, those sorts of things, there are opportunities for you to get to know schools, but if you're actually coming up with an application and, schools are going to ask you where else you're applying, and we kind of want it to make sense. So, if you're just saying top 10 schools, it seems like you haven't actually done research into what schools' strengths are, what really speaks to you, what you're hoping to get out of the program. And if you haven't done that, you're likely not going to find the program that's going to get you what you want either. So, we look at this in terms of how successful are you going to be in our school. If you don't know what our school does, how are you going to know if our school is going to do what you want it to do?
That's a great point. So lots of research. Her time at Deloitte maybe is well spent. She's got this event on design thinking that she's led. Is that something, Caroline, that would sort of stand out to you, that what they've done beyond the obvious?
So it looks like she's fairly early on in her career at Deloitte, right? So she would have been there for 2 years by now. So probably hasn't had a lot of leadership experience. So if she's taken the initiative to run something like that, then that's very useful because it will showcase her ability to organize a team and make things happen in a context that's a bit beyond what would normally be expected of her at that stage. So, and also, perhaps it's something that's a bit different from what all her peers have done. So again, going back to the point about management consultants and the difficulty of standing out. Any project that you've done that is a bit different from what your peers in your organization have done at the same level is good fodder for your application to sort of show how you're different and you've built different skills versus other candidates.
Right. I'm going to get Adrian to comment on the next profile. Let's see, who have we got? I think it's, do we move into the energy sector? No, we're with Nina, who's in asset management. She's got 3 years at Citi and now a couple of years at Bank of America before that. Fintech, that's a hot, sexy subject, right, for business schools, Adrian? So does that sort of, would that capture your attention?
We do see a lot of people that have an interest in the area. Of course, the more specific the person is in their essay describing their specific role within fintech, the more we're going to think that this person has done the work of figuring out where they fit in, and that's always reassuring. Looking at what the school may have to offer and then leveraging that in the story that they're telling. So we have a sense that not only are they clear or where they want to go personally, but they have identified sort of the features of the program or the resources of the program that will be very helpful in that transition.
Right. Now, a finance at undergrad, finance in her career, and then boom, out of nowhere, the accomplished pianist. Deborah, would that help her chances to bang out Chopin?
I mean, I think it's nice to have something that sort of stands out a little bit. Definitely, you know, for someone that's so technical, to have something that's creative is a nice addition to sort of round you out as an individual. Obviously, a bunch of her other extracurriculars are something that I think most business schools will find very attractive. You know, mentorship, you know, women in finance ambassador, those things are very interesting. But definitely, I think just from a quick scan of that, the thing that you're going to find at the bottom of the resume that's going to catch everyone is the accomplished pianist. Yeah. And it's also, you know, things like that are very unique also can spark interesting conversations along the way, whether it's with admissions or whether it's with companies you're applying with as well in the future.
Is that a good icebreaker for the interview? Something that...
I would definitely agree, and you have to also understand that when we're looking at these profiles, we're reading into what those things really mean. So if I see an accomplished pianist, I'm thinking this is a person that took countless hours to prepare to reach their goals and was dedicated for a number of years to reach an objective. In the same way, we'll look at an athlete and have the same conclusions. You know, here's a person that they're willing to put their body and their mind through a lot of pain and suffering to achieve a goal. So you can play it to your advantage. I think people that are into music are typically highly intelligent, as has been demonstrated through a number of studies. And I have yet to meet a musician that was not a cool person. So I think.
Okay, so Nina, you're cool. I think the next one is. Right, oil and gas. Now we saw when a barrel of oil hit, $28, and there was a spike in the number of people coming out of the energy sector applying to business school. John didn't do that. I mean, he spent 7 years at ExxonMobil. Now he's got a couple of years in renewables. So, you know, he's, 31, 32 years old and looking at business school. Caroline, he's talking about going into consulting, going into business school at 32. Right. Will that be a red flag?
Right. Yeah, so the age is something that, you know, he needs to think about how he's going to manage that, because it's obviously older than the average age of people starting at the schools that he's targeting. And so he needs to think about, you know, how he's going to convey why he has gained more from his work experience than someone who's coming in at an earlier stage, and, you know, why did he stay in his previous job for 7 years. You know, so explaining that career path will be important, because business schools are typically looking for, you know, typical candidate is a young, bright candidate who is on a fast track. Sometimes they will see candidates who are sort of, you know, early 30s, mid 30s, and have stalled in their careers and are looking for business school to sort of propel them forward again. And that may not be his case, but he needs to proactively address that so he's not sort of seen in that category of someone who's kind of got a bit stuck and hasn't quite managed to get where he wants to be without the MBA.
Right.
So it could look like he's coming to the MBA a bit late, so I think he needs to explain that. And then, as you said, I mean, consulting, you know, typically they're looking at the younger cohort in the MBA class. So, you know, it doesn't mean that it's impossible to get into management consulting post-MBA, but again, you know, you need to think through very carefully what your story is and show that it's not something that that you've just pulled out of thin air for the purposes of the application, that you've actually really done your research, that you know what sort of role you're going to play as a consultant, and and maybe that you're open to the non-traditional consulting firms, and you're not just looking at McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and you're looking a bit more broadly than that.
And in John's case, he's got great data points, GPA 3.9 and a 760 GMAT. We all envy him that score. And anything, can there be a downside of scoring too well? Or?
We want to make sure that there is a nice personality to match that, right? Because nothing wrong with folks that have 760s and 3.9s, but sometimes they spend a lot of time indoors, and some of those social skills sort of get compromised or sacrificed in the process. So just being able to convey, a sense of excitement about the school, being personable and relatable will be a huge plus. I do have, as an admissions officer here, some minor hesitations when I see the running and cooking and traveling. Those are very solo activities where he is exploring his passions, but there's no impact kind of in a larger setting, or at least other people to share that with. So I will be, if I'm interviewing this person or looking at the resume or those essays, looking for evidence that he's comfortable working with other folks, especially for somebody who's looking to be in consulting and looking at a job in strategy. Those are very sought after jobs. And at some point, people's skills are what's going to differentiate sort of this ultra elite in terms of grades, right?
Right. So if he just eats pot noodles from the cooking that he's done, you want something more communal and sort of sharing.
Maybe a potluck or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was John in the energy sector. We've got 2 or 3 left in 5 minutes still to go. Georgia, the humanitarian, and spending 3 years at Oxfam, and where I guess things got a bit sticky with the boss. And then the World Trade Organization. Social enterprise, we're seeing a lot of this. The S-Lab at Sloan, Haas of Kier, a lot of schools that are looking at that sort of impact. And ESA, I guess, Deborah, we should start with you, given that they have your school in mind. What do you think of Georgia's experience and profile?
Well, we get a lot of people that are interested in sort of social enterprise. Some of it has to do with, some of the programs that we have on campus, the mission of the school. So that is definitely a profile that we get quite a bit, not surprisingly. And, for someone that's worked at Oxfam, that's worked for the WTO, they've had a good deal of international experience. Mm-hmm. I'd say one of the things that I'd be curious about talking with this candidate is more, I understand quite a bit of the target schooling, but also sort of when you're looking at programs that are both 1 and 2 years, thinking a little bit about sort of why you might be wanting one over the other and being able to articulate that, because I do always find it interesting, because that's a big difference in terms of a program if you're going for 1 versus 2 years.
Now, unless Georgia left the words Oxford side in her ESA application, which does happen, of course, how would you know that she's applying to other schools? Is it because of where we're sending our GMAT scores and the institutional codes?
Oh, I mean, yes, like most schools will have a little bit of a knowledge from that. Frankly, if everyone told us they were just applying to our school, we'd assume they were lying to us. So it's perfectly fine to be applying to multiple schools, and the important thing is really, being able to articulate sort of what it is about that universe that interests you. And if you have like 4 schools in Texas and then YesA, which I've seen before, why tends to be the question. So, in that kind of universe, it makes sense. You can sort of have a story like these are the values that I find interesting. These are the things they have on campus. These are the things that attract me. So, it's, for most schools, you're sort of, in the list of schools that people typically apply to, we'll see a lot of the similar schools across that we would expect. It's more when there's sort of a very specific difference that we're going to really lean into it. And, don't feel like you're cheating on us to say that you're applying to other schools. We know you're applying.
But don't tell us during the interview that we're the wrong school, which does happen.
Keep the story straight.
Yes.
Adrian, just a word on, I think Harvard announced yesterday in the incoming class that 15% of those 930 individuals had used their GRE scores. Now, Georgia had taken the same path. Are you just as comfortable with the GRE as
Yeah,
you are
I
with the
think
GMAT?
there's a growing trend where a lot of business schools are accepting both equally. What you will typically find is that most schools have an extensive database built over decades where they can look at a number and have a sense of context anywhere around the world, and also an understanding of trends. With the GRE, it's a relatively newer set of numbers, so while we happy will take them or take them happily, we will want to see more or less how those numbers would fit into the larger demographic, which is comprised, 80% plus of GMATs. So as a word of advice, I would recommend somebody who's taking the GRE to have an understanding of where they would have been had they taken the other test by using one of those web resources that help you convert those numbers.
Great. And just a final question for you, Caroline. Obviously, her boss may no longer be the right person to ask for a letter of recommendation.
Yeah.
Should she include that in an optional essay? Or, I chose not to ask the obvious person that oversaw my career in the 3 years at the WTO or in Oxfam.
Right. Yeah, so if there isn't someone else who's obvious, who's a good choice, that she's been working with very recently, then I would say a few words about it. I wouldn't make a big deal out of it, but just, write a couple of lines to explain the situation. Maybe since then she started working with someone and has built up sufficient track record. I would say that you need to work with someone for at least 3 months, more or less, for them to, have sufficient material to write about you and work, pretty intensely with that person over that period. So maybe that's the case. She's got someone else, and if not, and her choice is going to look a little bit odd, then definitely explain it. And perhaps she could get someone else from Oxfam and someone from the WTO, and then it's absolutely fine. She doesn't have to say anything. But if she does, that's not a problem. The school is not going to hold it against her in any way, and they understand that not every candidate is able to get their current boss, as a recommender, and there may be many reasons for that.
Right, that could be very delicate. Right. Now, our time is up, but as CentreCourt goes through the US and Canada in the next 2-3 weeks, and if you would like your profile to appear to be discussed by admissions experts, then get in touch. Send your profile to Poets and Quants, and you might find yourself on that big screen. And to the three of you, thank you very much for your time and your insights. Caroline, Adrian, Deborah, thanks very much.
Thank you for having us.
And stay tuned. We're going to be streaming the next session, which is an admissions director panel with Stanford GSB, Berkeley Haas, and Imperial College from London. So stay tuned. Thanks very much.